This is my tribute to House of the Dragon, and it's not going to be a rant. I won't be describing the stupid moments in it. I'm not gonna be reviewing it anymore. This instead will be my way of coping with what I would describe as a loss, a death if you will, the death of something that at some point in the past had touched my soul. It will be just me passing through stages of grief so that in the end I can find peace for myself and hopefully others who feel like me might find it too. So as I've mentioned before on this channel, stories like this are not just some stories for me. They're not just books that I read. They're not just some films or shows that I watch in my spare time. No. I guess that's the case for most people maybe, and there's nothing wrong with it, but I'm not like that. These stories, all of these books that I'm reading and falling in love with, all of these films and shows that I cherish, all of the art that I consume, whatever it is, from a novel to a poem, a piece of music, or a painting, the ones that I experience and fall in love with, they touch me to the core and become a part of me, and they stay with me throughout life, like nothing else does. And it is they that keep me going through life. Never ever in my life, in times of difficulty, have I experienced real consolation by, say, being with friends or family. Like, no matter how many words of comfort they give me, it never really works. Not like art. When I was in my teens and the fifth floor window looked like an easy exit, it wasn't my friends or family that convinced me otherwise. It was instead Tolkien and Peter Jackson when they told me that there's good in the world and it's worth fighting for. It was Frank Herbert when he told me that I must not fear, and that if I only stay brave and take a look inward, I will survive my fear. It was George R. R. Martin when he showed me that Brienne knew she was gonna die fighting against 7 people, that she had no chance, and yet she stepped out to face them. To me, these are not just some fucking books and films that I loved. I am literally alive now because of them. And the person that I am today, I am because of these stories, and nothing else. If anything, I'm what I am today because of these stories and despite everything and everyone else in my life. And so, for a brief moment, House of the Dragon was one such story for me. I'll explain why in a second, but first I'll say that now it's dead for me, not just because of how the second season ended, but because of the entire second season. Like, I really didn't like any of it. A few cool moments here and there, but nothing major that I'll ever remember. So now that the story died for me, I need to let go and find peace. Like I did with so many other stories before, I had to cope with the death of The Hobbit, I had to cope with the death of Star Wars, I had to cope with the death of Game of Thrones, the death of Westworld, and so on and so forth. So many graves I've had to dig, and each time I've had to find peace all over again. And there we go. I'm digging up a fresh grave for House of the Dragon. I'll lay to rest the memories of it that I still love deeply. I'll bury them forever and place a flower on top so that I only remember the beautiful part. And so that this grave serves as a shrine of beautiful memories in my mind. How am I gonna do that? By giving myself a short speech describing the moment that I felt deeply in love with this story and the reason why. It was season 1, episode 8. I really loved the entire episode, and it had so many notable scenes for me. Alicent's horrible relationship with her children, Rhaenyra begging her father for help, and then him answering her call, the throne room intrigue, the insane death scene, that incredible embalming scene with Rhaenys watching. I just think it was such an amazing episode. But there is this one beautiful scene that I'll forever treasure in my heart. The scene of the feast between the families of Targaryen and Hightower. The overall arc of the episode was the dispute of the succession of Driftmark, where the king was too weak, the Hightowers were taking the reins of power, and they were trying to manipulate things so that Rhaenyra's children, and indirectly Rhaenyra herself, are driven out of the succession. And in the episode's plot twist, the king comes to his senses, re-establishes Rhaenyra's succession rights, and then, in one last desperate attempt, tries to bring his entire family together, both at the table and in life. A poor dying man, realizing there's a storm coming, and spending his last living hours crying and begging his loved ones to make peace and unite. And me feeling the tragedy of the futility because of knowing what's gonna happen anyway, and yet seeing the family start to smile and dance together briefly. It makes me experience such an emotional gem, just a moment of Shakespearean brilliance. Tragedy looms, and everyone knows it, and still, for those brief few minutes, they allow themselves to doubt for a moment, to ask themselves if maybe goodness will prevail after all. They let themselves off their guard for just a precious little bit, to be human, and be happy, and be a family. And for us viewers, it makes it all the more heartbreaking because we know what's coming, and there's absolutely no hope. And this moment of fragile beauty is topped off by something that the history nerd in me will treasure to the day I die, which is the musical piece in this scene. When the characters and interactions between them feel real and compelling, and when this is topped off by a perfect little piece of music such as this, it makes me want to cry. And I did tear up when I saw this scene, because two brilliant elements of realism come together to make up something which in my mind transcends fiction. First, as I mentioned, the characters and their struggle already feel real. And then the music, this little dance that I bet didn't even make most people blink, it made my heart melt because as a fan of music from times past, this piece sounds so authentic to me. The music that I usually listen to is preserved original medieval and Renaissance music from like the Ottoman Empire, from England and Italy in the 16th century. Basically just music from 5 or more centuries ago. And the dance in this feast scene, although completely made up for the show, it still sounds so legit as a musical piece from early modern Europe. When I listen to this music, I imagine Dutch musicians playing it to the Sultan in Constantinople. I imagine a person hearing it from a boat as he travels along the channels of 16th century Venice. I imagine it being played in Vasari's house during a visit by Michelangelo. And I imagine Henry VIII inviting Anne Boleyn to dance to it. This piece is so brilliantly made that it makes my imagination go crazy. And season 1 has now been long in the past, and yet since then, there's hardly been a week where I have not listened to this piece of music at least once. And because of how iconic this one specific scene was to me, the story and characters burned themselves into my heart, and I fell in love. And yes, I didn't think the first season was perfect, but Game of Thrones wasn't ever perfect either, and I still think it's a masterpiece. At that point, after I saw that feast scene, I let out a sigh, because I felt like Game of Thrones was truly back and redeemed in House of the Dragon. In that one scene, I felt the old spark come back. That feel of authentic humanity, combined with historical realism, I was sold. I fell in love with House of the Dragon. And this one moment in time where I fell in love will stay with me no matter what. Even if they ruined it now, and I don't care what they're gonna do next, I will always treasure that scene, that episode, and that season, imperfect as it was, as something that still touched my being. I lay flowers on the grave of House of the Dragon, and I'm thankful, at the end of the day, that no matter what came afterwards, I was still given this one little piece of beauty. And my eternal thanks to all the people who invested their love and effort into creating it.